My name is Rachel Morgan, but most people just call me Ray. I'm 24 years old and the youngest partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in Denver. People see my crisp suits, my courtroom wins my confidence, and they assume I've always had it together. But the truth is, 8 years ago, I was sleeping in my car with nothing but $64 in my wallet and a bruised cheek from the man who was supposed to love me the most. My story begins in the quiet suburbs of Illinois, where I grew up thinking my life was perfect. My mother, Emily, was a high school English teacher, and my father, Gerald Morgan, worked in financial services downtown. Our two-story colonial house was surrounded by rose bushes my mom lovingly tended each spring. We had family dinners at 6 p.m., sharp Friday movie nights, and long walks through the nearby park. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Or so I thought. It all began unraveling when I was 15. Mom started complaining of exhaustion. She brushed it off at first, blaming long hours at school stress hormones. But I noticed she wasn't eating much, and her clothes started hanging looser. The day she found a lump in her breast, Dad insisted she go to the doctor. Stage 4 breast cancer, metastatic, terminal. They gave her a year, maybe less. What followed was a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy, and whispered prayers. I became her shadow, taking over cooking, cleaning, and keeping up my grades between emotional breakdowns and late-night Google searches about miracle treatments. And Dad? He was present at first. He took leave from work, made sure Mom had her meds, and told her she was beautiful even when she lost her hair. I thought he was grieving too. But now I know better. Mom died on a chilly October morning. The leaves outside were golden and crisp. She passed peacefully with both of us by her side. I held her hand as it went cold. The funeral was dignified, filled with casseroles and condolences. My father barely spoke. He looked broken. I clung to him, thinking we'd be each other's lifelines now. 2 weeks later, I came home from school and found a strange red BMW parked in our driveway. Inside, a woman was in our kitchen. She had glossy platinum hair, bright red lips, and a perfume that filled the house like poison. "This is Veronica, sweetheart," Dad said, smiling too easily, his arm slung around her shoulders. "She's been helping me cope. She'll be staying with us for a while." Veronica smiled, showing too many teeth. "I've heard so much about you, Ray. I'm so sorry about your mother." The words were hollow, her tone too cheerful. My gut twisted. That night, I lay awake, listening to wine glasses clink, and laughter echo down the hall, the same laughter that had once filled this house with love. A few days later, I saw the text. Dad had left his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. A message from Veronica flashed. "Can't wait until she's gone." "Last night was incredible, baby." The timestamp was 3 months before Mom died. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He twisted the truth. "You're too young to understand," he said coldly. "Your mother and we had an arrangement." Lies. My mother believed in loyalty. She had whispered dreams into my ear while her body fell apart. Dreams for me to finish school, become someone she could be proud of. Not once had she hinted at an arrangement. The house changed quickly after that. Veronica's things replaced my mom's, her lotion bottles on the bathroom counter, her clothes in the master closet. Mom's garden was torn up to make room for a hot tub. Dad let it happen. The final straw came when I caught Veronica ripping up Mom's favorite peonies to make space for a patio bar. I screamed at her. She sneered. We fought. Dad came outside. And then he slapped me. The world blurred as my cheek stung. "If you can't live under this roof without causing drama," he said, "then don't live here." So I left. I packed a backpack with some clothes, my school laptop, and a picture of my mom. I took the $64 from my drawer. As I walked out, they went back to their landscaping plans like nothing had happened. That first night, I slept on a bench at the park. No one came looking for me. No one ever would. I didn't cry that first night, not out of strength, but because I was too stunned, too numb. I sat curled up on a cold bench near the duck pond, wrapped in a sweatshirt, staring at my breath in the darkness. The pain in my cheek was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. Grief, rage, betrayal. It all swirled together, threatening to suffocate me. I thought maybe someone would call. Maybe Dad would text me, ask where I was, demand I come home, even if it was just to yell some more. But my phone stayed silent, not even a missed call. I went to school the next day, trying to act normal, trying not to flinch when people looked at me too long. I washed up in the bathroom using paper towels and cold sink water, brushed my teeth in a gas station afterward. I told my teachers I'd been going through something and tried not to fall asleep in class. No one really noticed, not at first. I became good at disappearing in plain sight. The second night, I parked myself behind the library, hidden behind a row of trees. It was quiet there, safer. I didn't sleep much. A raccoon scurried past at one point, and I nearly screamed. By the third night, I realized I had no plan, no one to turn to. I tried calling a few of my mom's friends, women who had hugged me tightly at the funeral and promised, if you ever need anything. They all had reasons: busy schedules, family drama. One even told me, you should try to make it work with your dad. He's grieving too. They didn't understand, or maybe they didn't want to. I finally told my guidance counselor. She listened politely, then offered a pamphlet about foster care and said she'd have to file a report. You might be moved to a different district, she warned, and that could affect your grades. Translation: if I wanted stability, I had to fix this myself. And I did. I remembered something: the $400 my mom had given me for my 16th birthday. For college books, she'd said, smiling through her chemo. I hadn't spent a penny of it. It was still sitting in my savings account. I withdrew it all and bought the cheapest car I could find, a faded silver Saturn with more rust than paint. But it ran, and suddenly I had a bed, a place I could lock. I joined a cheap 24-hour gym so I could shower, ate mostly peanut butter sandwiches and cereal bars. I applied for a job bussing tables at a diner, then a second job at a gas station. I did homework during breaks, kept my head down, and worked like my life depended on it, because it did. Eventually, someone noticed. Mrs. Beckman, my senior English teacher, kept me after class one day. She gently asked if everything was okay, and I cracked. I didn't mean to, but the words spilled out of me like water from a broken pipe. She didn't judge. She didn't tell me to go home and talk to my dad. She didn't offer empty promises. What she did do was give me access to the school locker room before classes. She let me stash a few things in her classroom cabinet. One morning, I found a grocery bag with toiletries and a gift card tucked under my desk with a post-it note that just said, "For you. Keep going." That small act of kindness was enough to carry me through another week. And then another. Word spread quietly among a few of the staff. Not in a pitying way, but in a protective one. I started finding bagged lunches left on my desk, an old coat that just happened to be extra, a free ride to work from the janitor who was heading that way anyway. They didn't save me, but they gave me enough breathing room to save myself. The turning point came when I found out about the scholarship competition, a statewide essay contest for students facing adversity, the prize full tuition to any in-state college. I wrote my story, carefully, honestly. I left out the worst parts, but I included the truth about losing my mom, about how education had become my anchor, and I won. When I opened that acceptance letter, sitting in the back seat of my Saturn parked behind the gym, I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just about money. It was proof that I mattered, that I wasn't invisible. I finished high school with honors, walked across that stage with no family in the crowd, but my teachers clapped like they were. Mom would have been proud. I clutched the locket she gave me before she got too sick to stand. Inside was a tiny photo of the two of us, and the words she'd once whispered burned bright in my mind. Don't let anything stop you, not grief, not setbacks, nothing. I didn't, and I wouldn't. Not even when I learned years later that my father hadn't just kicked me out. He had stolen something meant for me, something my mother fought to protect even after death. But that part of the story, that comes later. College was everything I'd hoped for: freedom, challenge, a chance to become someone entirely new. But it was also exhausting. While other students complained about 8 a.m. classes and midterms, I was working 3 part-time jobs just to cover what the scholarship didn't. I nannied on weekends, shelved books at the library, and worked the night shift at a copy shop. I slept in short bursts, ate dollar store pasta, and learned to live on caffeine and adrenaline. But I was finally building a life on my own terms. I chose pre-law, not just because I liked arguing, but because it felt like justice had become my native language. Somewhere deep inside me, a voice whispered, "If no one else will fight for girls like you, then you will." I made it through 4 years of undergrad with a 3.9 GPA. No dorm parties, no spring breaks, just study, work, sleep, repeat. I had no parents, no home to visit on holidays, no safety net if I stumbled, but I also had no one to answer to. Still, the pain lingered. I had moments walking through campus holding my first acceptance letter to law school when I would reach for my phone ready to call my mom and share the joy. Then I'd remember. And the silence would hit me like a wave. My law school application essay was simple and honest. I wrote about my mother's last wish and how it became my compass. I ended it with the words, "Justice is what love looks like when it refuses to stay silent." I got in, a top-tier state school, partial scholarship. The rest came from loans I didn't let myself think too much about. By my second year, I was neck-deep in case law and cold coffee drowning in Latin phrases and hypothetical lawsuits. But I loved it. I loved learning how systems worked and how they failed. I loved dissecting arguments and finding cracks in carefully built facades. One evening during a late shift at the campus cafe, a woman walked in who looked vaguely familiar. She ordered a chai latte and squinted at my name tag. "You wouldn't happen to be Emily Morgan's daughter, would you?" I froze. No one had said my mother's name out loud in years. "Yes," I said cautiously. "She was my mom." The woman smiled warmly. "I'm Mara Taylor. I taught with her for over a decade. She talked about you constantly." We sat for a bit during my break. She told me stories about how my mom used to quote Shakespeare to her students and baked brownies for staff meetings. But then Mara said something that made my blood run cold. "I always thought it was strange about the inheritance," she said. "Your mom once mentioned her parents had left a trust for your college fund. She was so relieved, said it gave her peace." I stared at her. "What trust?" She blinked. "The one your grandparents set up. She said it would transfer to you when you turned 18. I didn't reply, I couldn't. That night I dug out my old laptop and began to search. Public estate records, probate court filings, anything I could get my hands on. And there it was. A trust account established by my maternal grandparents designated to transfer to Rachel Morgan upon her 18th birthday for educational purposes only. The trust had once held over $300,000, but I'd never seen a penny of it. According to the records, I had voluntarily signed paperwork relinquishing my claim at 16. Only I hadn't. My signature on the release forms, it was a forgery. I felt physically sick. All those years living in my car, rationing peanut butter, skipping meals, and there had been money. Money meant for me, meant to protect me, meant to fulfill my mother's dying wish. And my father had stolen it. I didn't sleep that night. My heart thudded with something new, not fear, not grief, resolve. I printed every document I could find, highlighted the dates, cross-checked signatures. I took everything to Professor Helen Royce, my estate law professor. She was sharp-eyed, blunt, and terrifying in the best way. She reviewed the documents, her face growing darker with each page. "This is fraud," she said flatly. "And since you were a minor when this happened, you may still be within the statute of limitations." She looked at me, her eyes fierce. "Do you want to go after him?" I didn't hesitate. Yes, because this wasn't just about the money. It was about my mother, about her memory. Her voice in my ear whispering, "Don't let anything stop you." He tried to stop me. Now I was going to stop him. Professor Royce didn't waste time. She connected me with a retired estate attorney named Edward Lane, who had practiced law for over 40 years, and more importantly, had once represented families like mine, middle-class people, trying to do right by their kids. The second he looked at the original trust documents, he frowned. "I remember Catherine Morgan," he said, adjusting his glasses. "She was meticulous, kind, and fiercely protective of her daughter." He flipped to the page with the forged signature. This he tapped it. Absolute garbage. Mr. Lane confirmed what I already suspected: the trust had been airtight. The only way to dissolve it before my 18th birthday was with my legal consent and my signature witnessed and notarized. Not only had the signature been forged, but the witness listed didn't exist. It was a fictional name, a made-up person. "It's almost laughable," Mr. Lane said, though his voice held no humor. "Sloppy, arrogant." I filed a formal fraud complaint with the State Bar Association and began drafting the civil lawsuit. I was 24 with a law degree, working at a firm that focused on estate disputes. I'd helped clients win back stolen inheritances. But this was different. This was personal. Nathan, my boyfriend now, a cybersecurity analyst, offered to help me dig deeper. He was the first person I'd fully opened up to since everything began. I'd met him during my second year of law school after my laptop crashed at a coffee shop, and he recovered my term paper like it was nothing. When I told him everything, he didn't look away. He didn't try to fix it with platitudes or say, "Maybe your dad was just overwhelmed." Instead, he leaned across the table and said, "How do we bury him legally?" With his help, I found even more damning evidence. A month after my mother's funeral, my father had moved large sums from the trust account into his personal investments, followed immediately by a down payment on a vacation home in Naples, Florida. Then a luxury car purchase. then 2 separate transfers to Tina's personal account. I hadn't thought about Tina in years, the woman who smiled like a snake, the woman who watched my mother die while planning her takeover. We found out she and my father were still married. They had a 5-year-old son now, a child I'd never met. They lived in a massive home in a gated community in Arizona, spent their summers abroad, and still posted inspirational family values quotes on Instagram. Every photo looked like a punch in the gut. Nathan traced the IP address linked to my release of the trust fund. It didn't come from my school. It came from my father's office computer. Piece by piece, it all fell into place. But to make the case airtight, I needed one more thing, someone who could speak to my mother's intentions. Someone who knew her, someone the court would trust. I called my mom's sister, Aunt Dana, for the first time in almost 9 years. When she picked up, I barely got out "It's Ray" before she burst into tears. "I thought I'd lost you forever," she whispered. She told me she had tried to reach me after the funeral, had called the house repeatedly. But my father had always told her I didn't want contact, that I blamed her for not being there. Later, he told mutual friends I had gone off the rails and didn't want family interference. He had cut me off from the one adult who might have helped me, on purpose. I believed him, Dana admitted through tears. "I'm so sorry." I flew to Portland to see her in person. We spent hours going through old photo albums, letters from my mother, even video recordings of birthday parties I'd forgotten existed. And then she handed me the linchpin, a handwritten letter from my mother dated 6 months before she died. "If anything happens to me, please make sure Ray gets the trust fund. It's the only safety net I have to give her." My hand shook as I read it. This wasn't just about money. It was about the promises a mother made. A few weeks later, Aunt Dana agreed to testify. My case was solid, legally, financially, emotionally. Every angle was covered. But as the court date approached, something unexpected happened. I started to feel afraid. Not of losing, I knew we had the facts, but of seeing him again. My father. The man who had once kissed my scraped knees, taught me to ride a bike, called me Pumpkin in that soft bedtime voice. The man who had stolen my future and left me to rot in the cold. What would I see in his face when he looked at me across the courtroom? Guilt, rage, or worse, nothing at all. Nathan squeezed my hand the night before the trial started. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said, "you're not that girl on the park bench anymore." I nodded, but part of me still was. And that part of me was finally about to speak. The courthouse was smaller than I expected. For years I had pictured this day, thought about walking into a cavernous courtroom, my heels clicking against marble floors, every eye turning to watch me confront the man who threw me away. But it wasn't like that. The courtroom was modest, almost clinical. Rows of wooden benches, pale beige walls, fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. Still, it felt holy to me, like the place where my mother's voice might finally be heard again. I arrived early with my legal team, Professor Royce Edward Lane, and 2 junior associates from my firm who had volunteered to assist. Nathan sat behind us, along with Aunt Dana. Her presence, calm and unwavering, gave me courage I didn't know I still needed. Then the door opened. My father walked in. He looked older, thinner, the rich brown of his hair now mostly silver. He wore an expensive navy suit and a watch I recognized Mom's retirement gift to him, which I thought he'd buried in her drawer. But the most jarring part wasn't how much he had changed. It was how little he looked at me. He didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge me. He took his seat at the defense table next to his lawyer, a man named Stephen Granger, a bulldog in a tailored suit who had represented high-profile estate clients across the state. And beside them, of course, sat Tina. Her hair was still platinum, her clothes still screamed wealth and designer labels. But her eyes flicked nervously around the courtroom. She didn't smile. Maybe she felt something after all. Fear, maybe. Or the premonition that the empire she'd helped build might be on the edge of collapse. The judge, Honjur Louise Pennington, entered the courtroom precisely at 9 a.m. She was known for being tough but fair. A no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, who had made headlines for her rulings in financial abuse cases. I had specifically requested her court. She looked over her glasses and said, "Let's begin." Our opening statement was short, sharp, and exact. "This is not just a story of inheritance," Professor Royce began. "This is a case about betrayal. A mother's last act of love, carefully documented, protected under the law, and destroyed by the very man entrusted to honor it." Granger's opening, as expected, painted me as unstable. "Ms. Morgan left her father's home at 16 unprovoked," he said smoothly. "She made reckless decisions and is now seeking to punish a grieving father for moving on. The plaintiff has manufactured this claim as revenge." The lie sat heavy in the air. Then the testimonies began. Mr. Lane took the stand first, walking the court through the original trust documents my grandparents had established. He explained how the trust was irrevocable, intended solely for my education, and completely inaccessible to anyone else unless I gave explicit permission while legally an adult. He pointed to my supposed signature on the dissolution form. "This is a forgery," he said flatly. "The notary listed doesn't exist. The filing date coincides with Rachel Morgan being a minor, meaning this transaction was not only invalid but illegal." Next came Lisa Kent, a forensic document examiner who confirmed that the signature was inconsistent with any legal documents I'd signed as an adult. "Not only is the pressure off," she said, "but the stylistic slant spacing and baseline deviations suggest the person who signed this was attempting to replicate a sample without proper skill. In other words, it was a clumsy imitation. A lie written in ink." Then came the financial evidence. We projected the account statements on the court screen. $310,000 withdrawn from the trust account. Nearly all of it gone within 6 months. Among the transactions, luxury car dealership real estate title transfer $18,000 spent on jewelry, and a wire transfer to an account under Tina's name. Granger tried to argue those purchases were unrelated, but when we showed a receipt for a bracelet engraved with "To Be Forever Yours," purchased 3 days after the withdrawal, even the judge raised her eyebrows. Aunt Dana followed her voice cracking as she described how my mother had spoken of the trust constantly. She worried every day about Rachel's future, she said. She made me promise if anything happened to her that I'd make sure Ray got to college. That money was for her, no one else. Then I took the stand. I had practiced my testimony 100 times, knew every word by heart. But when I opened my mouth and saw my father looking at me, arms crossed, face blank, I almost faltered. Almost. But I thought of my mother, of the night she asked me to promise I'd follow my dreams, and I breathed. "My mother died slowly," I said. "She lost her hair, her appetite, her strength, but never her love. She fought to stay alive long enough to see me graduate high school. And when it became clear she couldn't, she left behind this trust as her final act of protection." I paused, and my father destroyed that. Granger rose for cross-examination. He asked me if I ever ran away, if I had been a troubled teen, if I had fabricated this lawsuit out of bitterness. I answered calmly. "No, I was grieving, not reckless, and I didn't fabricate anything. I fought to survive, alone, while my father and Tina lived off money meant to keep me from becoming homeless." I looked directly at my father. "You threw me away, and then you stole from me, from her." He didn't blink. "But Tina looked down, for the first time." By the end of the first week, the courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become a battlefield of memory. Every witness, every document, every glance across the aisle reopened old wounds. But it also brought clarity, truth, and a kind of power I hadn't felt since before my mother got sick. The second week began with the defense's turn. Their strategy cast doubt. Blur the lines, paint me as ungrateful, vindictive, emotionally unstable. Their first witness was a former neighbor who claimed I had always been a dramatic teenager. She recalled seeing me storm out of the house once after a harmless disagreement and described my father as a devoted, heartbroken widower who did his best. It might have landed if the prosecution hadn't already shown the forged documents and financial timeline. A timeline that aligned too perfectly with my mother's death and the trust's disappearance. Then came my father. I wasn't prepared for how strange it would feel to hear him take the oath. To hear him say "I do" when asked to tell the truth, after a lifetime of doing the opposite. He was composed at first, practiced. He said all the right things. "I loved my wife. I did my best to care for her and my daughter. After her death, I was lost." He leaned into the role of the grieving husband, the overwhelmed father. But as soon as he was cross-examined, the cracks began to show. I watched from my seat as Professor Royce stood and began her quiet takedown. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "when exactly did you become aware of the existence of the educational trust?" He hesitated. "I'm not sure of the date. Catherine handled most of the paperwork." She showed him emails between him and Edward Lane from 5 years prior, conversations about transferring the trust, asking questions about its liquidity, and requesting early access. "So you were aware," she pressed. He nodded reluctantly. "Then let's talk about the signature used to dissolve the trust. You claim Rachel signed that of her own will." "Yes. At 16, she wanted nothing to do with us. She said so herself." "Funny," Royce said, her voice still calm. "Because she was a minor. meaning even if she had said so, it would have been invalid. Did you know that? He stiffened. No. Then explain this. She projected an email chain between him and a private notary service where he inquired about backdating a witness certification. He went pale. I was just asking hypothetically. Royce turned to the judge. Let the record show that the defendant inquired about retroactively legitimizing a document involving a minor's inheritance. He tried to recover. I was trying to keep the family stable. Rachel was rebellious. She didn't want to be part of our new life. So you excluded her from it, Royce said, legally, financially, emotionally. He clenched his jaw but didn't answer. Then she lowered the boom. Mr. Morgan, do you recognize this text message? On the screen appeared a message retrieved by Nathan from an old cloud backup of my father's phone. Tina, missing you already, baby. I hate that we have to keep this secret. She won't last much longer anyway. Sent 3 months before my mother died. I turned my eyes to Tina seated a few feet away. Her body tensed, her arms folded so tightly across her chest it looked like she was holding herself together. Royce continued. Do you recall receiving that message? He shifted. It was taken out of context. What context would that be, sir? He didn't answer. Judge Pennington raised an eyebrow. Please respond, Mr. Morgan. He looked down at the table. It was a mistake. Things were complicated. But it was too late. The courtroom felt still, frozen. My father had just admitted in essence to the betrayal we had built the entire case upon. But we weren't done. We called Tina next. She walked to the stand like she was stepping into fire. Her voice was steady at first, but her hands were shaking. Under questioning, she admitted she had known about the trust, that Gerald told her it was just a technicality and that Rachel wouldn't be needing it anyway. She tried to spin it. I believed him when he said it was his to use. I thought he was just reallocating family resources. But you knew it was meant for Rachel, Royce asked. Tina hesitated. Yes, she whispered. And you accepted gifts purchased with those funds. She nodded. And you used those funds to invest in a property now in your name? Another nod. Judge Pennington looked furious. When Tina stepped down, she didn't return to sit beside my father. She sat in the back, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. The prosecution rested. The courtroom emptied slowly that afternoon, the energy drained. Outside on the courthouse steps, Nathan met me with open arms. Aunt Dana pressed a thermos of tea into my hands. Tomorrow is closing arguments, Professor Royce said. But truthfully, I think it's already over. And for the first time in years, I believed her. Not because I'd won in the legal sense, but because I had stood up, told the truth, and made the man who broke me answer for it. That night I lay awake in bed thinking about my mother, her laugh, her warm hands in the garden, the way she always smelled like lilacs and chamomile tea. I hoped she could see me. Because tomorrow I would finish the promise I made to her, and justice would finally have a name. Mine. The final day of the trial dawned gray and wet as if the sky itself understood the weight of what was coming. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed in a black suit that had once belonged to a second-hand store, but now fit like armor. I wore my mother's earrings, simple pearls her favorite, and tucked a photo of her in my briefcase for courage. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, quiet but charged, the kind of tension that settles in before something irreversible happens. My father sat at the defendant's table, eyes forward, jaw tight. His confidence had drained away over the past week, replaced by something colder, panic maybe, or realization. Tina sat a few rows behind him, separate now. She hadn't looked at him since her testimony. I wasn't sure what had broken between them, but I knew it wasn't love. Maybe it was fear, or the looming financial ruin she hadn't signed up for. Judge Pennington took her seat and nodded to the attorneys. Counselors, you may proceed with closing arguments. Professor Royce stood. Her voice was soft but carried across every inch of the room. Your Honor, what this case comes down to is one word: trust. Not just the legal kind, the human kind. Catherine Morgan created a trust to protect her daughter Rachel. A financial promise, yes, but also a moral one. She wanted her daughter to be safe, to have a future, even if she herself did not. But the man entrusted with that duty, her own husband, betrayed her. He didn't just take the money. He forged documents, isolated Rachel from her family, and used the funds to build a new life, complete with a new partner, new child, and new house. All while Rachel slept in her car, skipped meals, and clawed her way through law school alone. She paused, then continued more quietly. This isn't about vengeance. Rachel doesn't want revenge. She wants what her mother gave her: opportunity, dignity, a future, and most of all, the truth. Granger's rebuttal was muted, subdued. Gone was the confident, smirking defense attorney. He tried to claim confusion, emotional distress, the complexity of estate law. But it was over. Everyone knew it. Even him. When the judge announced she'd issue her verdict the next morning, I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. Outside the courtroom, Aunt Dana wrapped me in a hug so tight I nearly cried. Nathan held my hand the entire walk back to the car. We didn't say much that night, just sat on the couch drinking tea, watching rain hit the windows. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind running through every moment of the trial, what I could have said better, what I wished I'd shouted in the courtroom, what my mother would have thought. But in the morning I felt calm. Ready. The courtroom was full when the judge returned. A few reporters had shown up. Apparently, the story had leaked daughter Sue's father over inheritance fraud, and people were interested. Of course they were. It was sensational. It was scandal. But for me, it was just life. Real and raw. Judge Pennington looked at us from the bench, her expression firm. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff. My heart stopped. She continued, her voice resolute. The evidence of fraud, fiduciary breach, and intentional misrepresentation is overwhelming. The defendant knowingly forged documents to access funds not legally available to him and used those funds for personal gain, while the rightful beneficiary faced extreme hardship. This court orders restitution of the original trust amount, with interest totaling $447,000 and an additional $200,000 in punitive damages. Furthermore, the court refers this case to the State Bar for review of potential criminal conduct related to document forgery. Gasps echoed in the courtroom. I didn't hear them. All I could hear was my mother's voice in my head. Don't let anything stop you. I had done it. Tears blurred my vision as Nathan squeezed my hand, and Aunt Dana whispered, she would be so proud. Across the room, my father sat frozen. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a hard line. He didn't look at me, not once. Tina stood and quietly walked out of the courtroom, never glancing back. I stood too, not out of triumph, but out of relief. Justice wasn't a thunderclap. It was a quiet truth finally spoken out loud. Outside, the sky had cleared, the rain was gone, and the sun broke through the clouds like a benediction. The reporters swarmed, microphones and questions flying. What will you do with the money? What do you want people to learn from your story? I looked at the cameras, at the faces, at the world finally listening. This was never about money, I said. It was about honoring my mother, about showing that abuse doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it looks like stolen opportunities, isolation, and silence, but silence doesn't win. Not today. And I walked away toward the life I had rebuilt with my own hands, toward the promise I had finally fulfilled. The days following the verdict passed in a blur of paperwork, press requests, and long overdue sleep. I signed a mountain of legal documents. My father's financial team processed the court-ordered transfers with mechanical efficiency, like it was just another item on their to-do list. I received the full amount of the original trust, the interest, and the punitive damages, all just under $650,000 after taxes and fees. But the money didn't feel like a windfall. It felt like restoration, like something sacred had finally been returned. I opened a separate account and immediately transferred the majority of it into a new legal entity, the Catherine E. Morgan Educational Trust. I'd made the decision months before the trial ended, during one particularly long night in law school, when I was rationing soup and wondering how many hours of sleep I could survive without. I wanted to give other young people what I had needed at 16: safety, stability, a chance. With the help of Nathan and Professor Royce, I worked with a nonprofit consultant to create a foundation that offered scholarships, legal assistance, and mentorship for young adults who had been disowned, displaced, or betrayed by their own families. The first scholarship application went live 6 weeks after the trial. We called it the Garden Grant, named after my mother's flower beds, because those perennials like her love came back even after a brutal winter. Meanwhile, my father vanished from public life. From what little I heard through former neighbors and mutual acquaintances, the financial damage had been just the beginning. His reputation as a fiduciary had been shredded. He'd quietly resigned from his advisory firm. The State Bar investigation into the forgery was still ongoing, but even without prison time, his career was essentially over. Tina predictably filed for divorce within the month. She left with their son, moved to Scottsdale, and removed all traces of Gerald from her social media. She even changed her last name back. I'd like to say I felt some sense of satisfaction, but the truth, I just felt done. He was no longer my problem, no longer my phantom. no longer my defining wound. One afternoon, I received a plain white envelope in the mail. No return address. But the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My father. I stared at it for days before I opened it. Part of me didn't want to. Part of me wanted to burn it without reading a word. But curiosity won. Inside was a short letter written in his careful cursive. Rachel, I know I have no right to ask for your time. I know you owe me nothing. But I wanted to say that the court was right. You deserved better. Your mother deserved better. I failed. And then I failed again by lying about it for so many years. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know I see what I did now. I'm sorry. Dad. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. It didn't fix anything. But it didn't undo anything either. It was just a thread, frayed, barely holding. A few months later, I stood on stage at the first Catherine Morgan Trust Awards ceremony. 5 students, all under the age of 21, sat in the front row, each of them survivors of neglect, estrangement, or abandonment. Each of them now funded and mentored with a plan for the future. Behind them, a slideshow played photographs of my mother laughing in the garden, reading on the porch, holding baby me in her arms. I stepped up to the podium, took a breath, and looked out into the crowd. My mother believed that education is more than just books and grades, I began. It's a form of safety, a way out, a door. And when everything else is taken from you, education remains a lifeline. This foundation was born from betrayal, but it lives in hope, in purpose, in choosing to use pain not as a weight, but as a tool. Nathan sat in the front row next to Aunt Dana, both of them smiling. I felt a peace I hadn't known since I was 15. That night, I found myself walking through a public garden downtown. The scent of lilacs and damp earth brought my mother back to me in a way nothing else could. I sat on a bench under a lamppost and whispered, "I kept my promise, Mom." And I swear I felt the wind shift. Like maybe, just maybe, she heard me. In the year that followed, life unfolded in ways I hadn't dared to imagine. The Catherine Morgan Trust grew faster than I expected. We received over 200 applications that first year, heartbreaking stories from teenagers sleeping in friends' garages, from students couch surfing while trying to graduate, from young adults whose families had turned their backs because of who they loved or what they believed. I read every single one, and each one reminded me I wasn't alone. For so long, I'd carried shame like a second skin. Shame that I didn't have family at graduation. Shame that I'd once lived in a car. Shame that I had been thrown away by the very person who was supposed to love me most. But these letters showed me something I hadn't seen before, something I hadn't allowed myself to believe. What happened to me wasn't my fault. And it wasn't rare. There were thousands of us, maybe millions, quiet survivors of private betrayals, and we were starting to find each other. I shifted my legal career to reflect that. Instead of chasing high-paying firm promotions, I opened a small legal clinic dedicated to helping youth and young adults in financial or legal conflict with their families, especially over trusts, inheritances, and housing. I hired 2 paralegals and took on my first 2 clients, a 19-year-old who'd been left out of a will by an estranged stepfather and a 22-year-old fighting for access to her own college fund that her parents had drained without consent. Every case was personal. Every client reminded me why I started. Nathan was endlessly supportive. We moved into a modest but cozy townhouse near downtown, filled it with books and plants and late-night takeout. He proposed on the anniversary of the verdict on the same courthouse steps where I had once faced my father. I said yes. The wedding was small, just a garden ceremony with Aunt Dana officiating and a few close friends. No white doves, no pageantry, just laughter, sunflowers, and a few tears. We wrote our own vows. "I promise to never walk away when things get hard," Nathan said. "To believe you even when the world doesn't. To stand beside you whether we're in a courtroom or just trying to fix a leaky faucet at 2 a.m. I laughed through tears and said I promise to let someone love me even when I'm scared. To build a life that feels like a home. And to always keep fighting not just for me, but for every person who's ever been made to feel small." Aunt Dana cried the whole time. After the ceremony, she gave me a framed photo of my mom on her wedding day, smiling vibrant, holding a small bouquet of lavender. Next to it was a handwritten note I'd never seen before, folded carefully and yellowed with age. "To Ray for your wedding day. Love is a leap of faith, but so is forgiveness. Don't let your past define your future. Mom." I sat with that letter for a long time, not because I was thinking about my father, but because I realized I no longer needed anything from him. Not answers, not apologies, not even closure. I had created something he could never take away, a life on my own terms. Still, one day in early spring, I received another envelope in the mail. No return address. Just the same slanted handwriting. Inside was a check. Made out to the Catherine Morgan Trust. 1,000. No note, no message, just the money. I stared at it for a long time, unsure what to feel. It wasn't guilt money. It wasn't redemption. It was something else. A quiet admission, maybe, or an attempt to matter again. I deposited it into the foundation's account. Then I sent an automatic receipt and wrote only 2 words: thank you. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was freedom, and it was enough. By the second year of the foundation, we had awarded over a dozen full scholarships, dozens more emergency grants, and expanded our services to include temporary housing partnerships with local nonprofits. I gave talks at law schools and youth advocacy conferences. My story, once a private wound, became something I shared publicly, not for sympathy, but for connection. And every time I stood at a podium, I asked the same question. How many of you had to raise yourselves? Each time hands rose, slowly, then all at once. People, mostly women, lined up after those events to tell me their own stories. Stories of being disinherited, of being scapegoated, of being told, you're too emotional, or you're the problem when they tried to speak their truth. I wasn't just an attorney anymore. I was a mirror, a reminder, a witness. And with every story I heard, I began to heal a little more. Nathan and I settled into married life with ease, like we were catching our breath after years of treading water. He joined a cybersecurity firm, still consulting with the foundation on digital safety and fraud prevention. He insisted on cooking dinner at least 3 nights a week, even if it meant microwaving frozen lasagna and pretending it was gourmet. He made me laugh, every day. And after years of holding the world on my shoulders, that laughter felt like oxygen. Aunt Dana visited, often becoming a fixture in our home. We called her the soul of the foundation after she took on a volunteer role mentoring scholarship recipients. She hosted Sunday dinners, kept clippings of every news article about our work, and carried a worn photo of my mother in her wallet like a saint's icon. One evening, as we sat on the porch sipping iced tea, she asked softly, "Have you thought about writing her a letter?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. My mom, she nodded. Just tell her everything, what you've built, who you've become. The idea stayed with me for days. And then one quiet Saturday morning, I sat down at my desk and wrote, "Dear Mom, I don't know where to begin. You've been gone for so long, but you're everywhere. In the scent of lavender, in the stories I read to our scholarship students, in the way I fight for people who've been left behind. You told me not to let anything stop me, and I didn't, not even grief, not betrayal, not the nights I thought I'd disappear. I became a lawyer like you hoped. I built a life, a home, a foundation in your name that's helping kids who were discarded the same way I was. I married a man who sees me, really sees me, and loves me in a way that feels healing. You were right, Mom. Love is a leap of faith. So is survival. So is truth. Sometimes I wonder what you'd say if you saw me now. I hope it would be something like, you did it, Ray. You kept your promise. I hope you know I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second. Love always. Your daughter, Rachel." I printed it, folded it, and placed it between the pages of Pride and Prejudice, my mom's favorite novel. It sat there on my bookshelf, a quiet tribute. A sealed conversation between the two of us finally finished. Later that month, the foundation received its largest donation yet, a $50,000 grant from a local philanthropist who had attended one of my speeches. We used it to launch a legal aid fund for youth fighting inheritance-related abuse, helping them hire attorneys when their families tried to strip them of what they were owed. I watched as our clients began winning back money, winning their voices, winning freedom, and I knew then, beyond any doubt, this wasn't just justice for me. It was justice for all of us. By the time my 3rd year at the foundation arrived, I was no longer just running a nonprofit, I was part of a movement. Survivors across the country had begun organizing, sharing stories, demanding legal reform. We weren't just whispering about emotional abuse and inheritance fraud anymore. We were shouting. And people were listening. Legislators began proposing new protections for minors in family trust cases. Universities reached out to partner with our foundation, wanting to offer emergency housing and legal resources for at-risk students. News outlets started running features on what they called the silent epidemic of financial betrayal. They asked to interview me often. At first I hesitated, but I remembered the girl I used to be, and I spoke for her. One of the most surreal moments came during an award ceremony hosted by a National Women's Legal Association. They were honoring trailblazers under 35. When they called my name, I walked onto the stage, accepted the glass plaque, and took the microphone. I looked at the sea of polished professionals and said, "I'm not here because I had a plan. I'm here because I had no other choice. Because one night when I was 16, I slept in a car parked behind a grocery store. And I told myself I would not disappear." I paused. Some of us grow up learning that love has conditions, that safety can be revoked, that money matters more than memory. But we don't have to stay silent about it. Our voices are not too much. Our pain is not irrelevant. And our stories, no matter how messy, are worthy of being heard. They gave me a standing ovation. But the part that mattered most came later in the hallway, when a young law student stopped me and said, "I'm going through what you went through. My mom died last year. My dad's remarried and trying to cut me out. I thought I was crazy. But hearing you speak, I feel sane again." That's when I knew. What I had done, what I had fought for, was bigger than one courtroom, one verdict, or even one foundation. It was a lifeline for every person who'd been told they didn't matter. Nathan and I celebrated our second anniversary that spring. We took a road trip along the West Coast, stopping in little towns and collecting used books from tiny cluttered shops. We laughed more than we had in years. We talked about the future, not in vague terms, but in clear ones. "We could start fostering in a year or two," Nathan said one night watching the sunset from the deck of a beach rental. "Kids like you once were. They need people like you." The idea hit me like sunlight. Warm, unexpected, beautiful. Maybe I whispered. That summer, the Foundation's board voted to expand nationwide. We opened a second office in Atlanta with plans for a third in Seattle. My schedule became a blur of travel grant meetings, advocacy panels, and late-night Zoom calls with staff. But I never felt burned out. Because I wasn't doing this alone. One afternoon in late August, a staffer knocked on my door. "Ray, there's someone in the lobby asking for you." I walked out expecting a donor or journalist. But it was a teenage girl. Thin, wary, shoulders hunched like she expected to be yelled at just for breathing. She held a worn duffel bag and looked like she hadn't eaten properly in days. "My name's Lily," she said. "I saw a video of you online. I didn't know where else to go." I nodded, my throat tight. "You came to the right place." We got her food, a hotel voucher, connected her with our legal aid team. As I watched her sit in the break room scarfing down a sandwich, I felt a tear slip down my cheek. Because I saw myself in her, and this time she wouldn't be sleeping in a car. Not on my watch. 1 year later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I found myself back in the place where it had all started, the old neighborhood in Illinois. The house I once called home had been sold 6 months after the trial. A young couple lived there now, judging by the tricycles on the porch and the freshly planted hydrangeas in the yard. I didn't stop, didn't knock. I just parked across the street and sat for a while, watching the windows, remembering the girl who had once looked out from behind those curtains, dreaming of a future that didn't hurt. I wasn't here to reclaim anything, just to release it. Across town, I met Aunt Dana for lunch at a small cafe my mother used to love. We sat by the window, shared a pot of Earl Grey, and talked about everything and nothing. About new board members, about Nathan's hilarious attempt at sourdough, about the little library the Foundation had built at a group home last month. And then she leaned across the table and said, "I wish your mom could see all this." I smiled. She does. Later that night, back in Denver, I returned to the Foundation office to pick up a file I'd forgotten over the weekend. The building was quiet, the city lights glowing through the tall windows. I passed the wall we'd turned into a mural, photos of every scholarship recipient, framed quotes from survivors, a painted banner that read, "You are not alone." I stood there a long time just breathing it in. This wasn't a monument to pain. It was a monument to rising. Back home, Nathan was waiting with 2 mugs of cocoa and our sleepy dog curled up by the couch. We curled up, 2 legs tangled, music soft in the background. We didn't talk about the past anymore. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined us. The final piece fell into place 3 months later. The Catherine Morgan Trust was selected for a national award for humanitarian impact. I was invited to speak on a stage bigger than any I'd stood on before, televised, packed with dignitaries, philanthropists, survivors, strangers who had become part of our story. As I walked up to the podium, I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. I looked out at the audience and said, 8 years ago, I was a 16-year-old girl sleeping in a car with $64 to my name. I was homeless not because I broke the law, but because my family broke a promise. I survived by sheer will, by the kindness of a few teachers, and by the memory of a mother who believed in me even in her final breath. Today, that same girl is standing on this stage, and she's not alone anymore. I paused. My story is not unique. That's the tragedy and the hope. Because for every one of me, there are hundreds of others who are still out there waiting to be seen, waiting to be believed, waiting to know that they matter. I took a breath. So if you remember nothing else, remember this. You are allowed to walk away from people who harm you, even if they share your blood. You are allowed to rebuild, to rise, to redefine what family means. And you are allowed to use your pain not as a curse, but as a compass. The room was silent for a moment, and then thunderous applause. After the ceremony, a young girl with a trembling voice approached me. "I'm applying to law school," she said. "Because of you." I smiled my heart full in a way I couldn't explain. "Then you've already won," I told her. As we drove home that night, Nathan reached across the console and squeezed my hand. "You did it," he whispered. And I knew what he meant. Not just the case, not just the foundation, not just the awards. I had done something far more miraculous. I had taken the worst day of my life and turned it into someone else's second chance. And that more than anything was what my mother would have wanted. Not revenge, but redemption. Not silence, but legacy. Not survival, but purpose. And as we turned onto our quiet street past homes filled with laughter and light, I looked up at the sky and whispered once more, "I kept my promise, Mom." And this time I felt her in the wind smiling.